Hi, and welcome back to the Britt Mayer Show. Today, I am joined with my friend Elijah Stanfield. He is the co-creator and illustrator of the popular children's book series, The Tuttle Twins. These books present complex ideas of economics and political philosophy aimed at empowering children and their parents, and they have helped me, with the knowledge necessary to secure a future of freedom and prosperity. In addition to his contributions to children's literature, Elijah is an accomplished video director working with numerous Fortune 500 companies and various political campaigns. He resides in Tennessee with his wife, April, and their 6 children. You have 3 times the number of kids that I do, so good job. Welcome, Elijah. Thank you so much for sitting down with me for this really important conversation today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be great. I want you to really feel free to break down complex terms in 5th grade language so that the average American tuning in can understand what the heck we're talking about. So we're going to dive into the world of money and fiat currency and what the heck is going on with our insane debt in America and what we can do about it. And a lot of these terms are really tricky. And I was telling you in the green room, I think there's such a barrier to entry into this conversation because people just feel like, I have no idea, like we're talking huge numbers. I don't even know how to pronounce trillion. And we're talking trillions of dollars in debt and trillions of dollars in interest debt. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about Jekyll Island and what happened on Jekyll Island and why that matters.
All right. So what we're going to go over today, I think a lot of times people use those big words because when you break it down, it sounds so crazy. It sounds like something out of a science fiction book or some, crazy conspiracy. You know that meme where that guy's got the strings all over the wall and he's like talking all intensely. It sounds like that. So that might sound like today because if I break it down into, 5th grade terms. But for about 100 years, the United States did not have a central bank. And in that time, humanity went from the Stone Age, not the Stone Age, but, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, into modern times where we have technology. It was the greatest leap forward that humans have ever experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So that did make some people happy because for hundreds of years, the central bank of Europe, it's various central banks, but really there's one major central bank in Europe, had been dealing with the West for hundreds of years. And they didn't like that the United States wasn't part of their cartel. So Jekyll Island, Georgia, I think it's 1910, a group of banking interests, people that represented the major banking interests. The most notable that we'd all know is the Rockefellers, and then the European end of it would be the Rothschilds through J.P. Morgan, Kuhn and Loeb, Vanderberg, Wahlberg, and so then the senator Nelson Aldrich,
Mm-hmm.
who had relationships with the Rockefellers. So they came together and they wanted to create this money cartel. But what we're taught in school, and if you talk to any normie, they'll say, well, they wanted to create this central bank to, regulate our money supply and to help make our economy run smoother, and so we didn't have so many crashes and busts and these weird cycles. But that's obviously not what happened. That's not what their intent was, and it didn't even work because after that came the Great Depression and many other times where the United States and the world went bankrupt. So their motivation was to reinstate a central bank in the United States. So that they could control. And it's really, there's we know what feudalism is. It's the old system of kings and peasants, so the rulers and the peasants, the elite and the peasants. And there was an update to that in the early 17th century, 1500s. where called mercantilism, and it wasn't just the kings and the lords owning the land and then the peasants would work it. It had to do with trade, and it had to do with finance. It had to do with debt and things like that. And that was a system we're actually under today. That's what they want to reinstate as a system of mercantilism, which is what we could call today as the economic side of fascism, where there's the corporate powers and the government powers get together. Whatever there's profit, when there's profit, that's privatized. Whenever there's losses, that's socialized, and the taxpayers pay for that. That sounds very familiar with what we have today, and that's what they wanted to reinstate. So that's what happened on Jekyll Island. They met in secret because they knew the American people did not want this, but they passed it through. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, and along with it, the 16th Amendment, which made what was previously unconstitutional an income tax, so that the taxpayers could pay the interest on that debt.
What was it before we had this central bank in America? Because that's a long time that you had America from inception to 1913 running without a central bank. What was going on then?
Before the central bank, we had an honest money system based off of gold, which was essentially unmanipulatable from the government. You see, when you have a money system based on gold, if you want to go to war, you have to raise taxes, and people would be very cautious and careful about what wars they went to, what public works they spent on, because they would have to actually pay for it. You couldn't go into massive amounts of debt, trillions in debt. So that's what we functioned on, was just an honest money system. It was the opposite of feudalism, where every person had the opportunity to own land, to be productive, to trade honestly with money. And that's a good question, is what was the money like back then?
Right.
And, a dollar was worth $1 of labor and value and the things that you produced, and you could trade with another person. It was an honest, hard money.
It was backed. You had it. Right. It was truly backed.
Right. And people were free to own land and own property and make claims, and they had rights. And this is just, for the first time, the peasant class could interact with the real world and benefit from it. Whereas before, they were always constrained with these structures of royalty or central banking, where they were actually just kind of being, leached from. And now for 100 years, America was just a really free people.
And under that original system, it would actually allow workers to rise above, right? Because they weren't constrained by any set algorithm or anything that would hold them back from reaching. They could become however prosperous they truly wanted and worked to become. That would have been under the former system before you have the central bank step in and everything changes. So talk us through what actually changed with the advent of the central bank in 1913. How did that change the dollar?
Well, there's been a progression since then of what the dollar means. It was originally backed by some dollar, and then there was a time where all the gold in the United States was confiscated by the president. I think it was in 1933. Then in Richard Nixon, he got us off the gold standard. And that was 40.
Yeah. We actually toured a gold mine with my kids last year about this time. And the guy was so knowledgeable. And we got to walk through this abandoned mine. And there are still tools that were left behind from that time that you're talking about. And one of my kids was asking why the tools were still there. And he said, well, because when the miners left, they were told it was going to be 2 weeks. It was a 2-week waiting period that everyone got to go home, just like the 2 weeks to slow the spread. It was 2 weeks and we'll figure it out with the gold situation. And then they just never came back. And then the gold was confiscated and it was the buyback program, but you weren't allowed to keep more than a certain amount of gold. And then that just sends us into where we are now. But that was very, very recent. You're talking about like the 30s, I think, is 30s or 40s is when that happened.
Yeah, I never heard that. That's a really cool little story. But what I can explain and what we have to deal with now is what the money is now. And the way that really kind of like taught me, enlightened me what this is if you think about a credit card company, Discover Card, let's say, or Visa, whatever. So when Discover Card extends to you like a $10,000 line of credit, they're not setting aside $10,000 in the vault somewhere for you. They actually have no vault. They actually have no money that they're lending you. They're just inventing it out of thin air. But you are going to spend years working your brains out to pay that back plus interest. Now, if you wrap your head around that, that's just a criminal thing. They gave you nothing. They sacrificed nothing. They just had the legal privilege of extending to you this debt, and you have to work to pay it back plus interest. So that's actually how commercial banks work. That's how your mortgage works. That's how your car loan works. That's also how the federal government works with the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank. Is there's no reserves. They're not loaning you anything. They're not loaning Congress anything. They are just making up numbers, digital numbers, sending it to Congress, and then we, the American people, are expected to pay that back plus interest. It's that's a racket. That's a criminal racket. It's just there's no other way to think about it, right?
It is, and it's I don't understand how it's been allowed to continue on for this long, to a point now where we are at this. As of this end of this fiscal year, we are at 4.918 trillion interest on national debt. That means that 23% of all government revenue, 1.133 trillion, went to interest on the debt. And then we're now on pace for 30% of all government revenue going to interest payments in 2025. How is this even allowed to continue on, and what is the solution? Because we're in this situation now where we're facing this massive interest and huge debt. We're at now right around 36 trillion, a new record of debt that is going to end up being handed to our kids. So it seems super messy and really overwhelming. And I have a couple questions, but the first is, what's the solution then? Like, how do we find our way out of this mess?
Well, I think first is knowledge, right? Henry Ford said if the American people knew how the banking industry worked, there'd be a revolution by morning. And that was not, he wasn't being dramatic. It was absolutely true. And it's even worse today by far than it was back then. I think we need to understand first, to understand like what is the debt, and every single dollar, like before we was like $1 worth of gold, transfers $1 worth of wealth. A dollar now doesn't represent wealth; it actually represents debt. That was money that was created by debt. It represents debt. So we're trading back and forth debt. We're not trading back and forth wealth. It's just mind-boggling. Like you can't even wrap your head around what that means. But it does bring up some questions. Is if all of our money is debt, and we have to pay that back with interest. Where does the interest come from?
Right.
Where's the
And
money to pay the interest?
that's a super important question because it seems like we would never be able to get out of debt.
Exactly, because we have
Ever.
to print more money to pay the interest on the debt. So this system was never designed to pay back, but it was designed to glean the interest, right? But yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I would think it's a system put in place that if you take it all the way to its logical conclusion, it's meant to keep the people who are in power empowered. Whoever it is that holds our debt and keeps us in debt is actually the freest. And then those of us who can never rise out from debt are actually in poverty, and we've become indentured servants or slaves, is how I would see it.
Yeah, and those people that own the debt, if they can print money out of thin air, why do they care if they pay us money back with interest? Like, why do they even care? Because it's just this stuff that they invented. So why are they so concerned about getting the interest back? And you've hit the nail on the head, is that this is a closed loop system. It's a machine that they live outside of. And the money that they print is just fuel for the hamsters to run around. That's us. And so what is the point? What's the real objective of this if it's not money? Because they're above money. They're above this currency that they create. And like you said, and it's the exact same thing that the central banks wanted before. This is the foundation of an imperial system where they want to go wage war around the world, enslave more people, include them in their machine, and take resources. It's just this empire building like the old days. And it's not America. We know that this isn't just the Americans. And we our peasant minds, we think of America, Canada, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the South Koreans. We think of these things, but they don't think of things like that. They think of it as an empire. They're just going to take it all. That's what they're
walk me through the war machine aspect. How does this connect into, like you said, there are entities living outside of the machine that we are forced to live in. There are people out and entities outside of that. And then they are going in this imperialistic system they've created to wage war and to bring others into this machine. What does that look like? How does that happen?
So I guess we can just try to do some research, and we won't find an answer of who they is, right? And I think you probably tried to figure this out yourself.
Hard. Right? Very hard. I talked to you about that earlier. It is very hard to find out who the theys are that are outside of the machine.
Right. So there's the Fed. And the Federal Reserve Bank is actually the bank of all the world currencies. This happened in Bretton Woods in it was after World War II, Bretton Woods, 44. So the Federal Reserve Bank is the bank of the world. Right? All currencies are attached to this currency. Who owns the Federal Reserve Bank? The 12 Federal Reserve, the independent Federal Reserve, the partner banks, the 12 partner banks, and they're all scattered around the country.
Right.
Well, who are the shareholders of those 12 banks? The commercial banks. All right. So who owns the commercial banks? Like J.P. Morgan and
BlackRock,
Wells Fargo. Yeah, it's
Vanguard. Right.
You're going to come down to that. It's Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. They're going to own the biggest shares of those things. And in large part, they own the majority shares in most of the major corporations, like the drug companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, the military contractors,
and
but also like Disney, Target, and all these things. So they're not only after like the military imperial side of things. They're after the social side, the entertainment side. They own Hollywood. They own Target. They own. They want to also recreate the world socially with a social credit system. That's when we get into like the World Economic Forum and the social credits, and that's what they're really after. That's why you see like Budweiser, like who are like pandering to
All the
trans people.
DEI.
Like, it's
Yes.
like that's not going to go well for their shareholders. So what
Right.
do they
But
really want?
it's a social credit score. But how does that connect to the war machine? Like how do, yes, we know that those names, for anyone who's been paying attention, those names would be familiar, that they dominate media, even real estate, like land. I mean, you look over at the landscape of America and all the things, entertainment, food,
Right.
education, entertainment, it's all dominated by those names. But how does that connect to the war machine? And how does
So,
that
right.
connect to the fiat currency by our central banking system?
Right. So all of these corporations, we people work directly or indirectly for those companies as support. Like, I'm going to build your house. I'm your plumber. I'm your doctor.
Right.
But generally, they own all the companies. They also own the shares of the Fed. So they have this control. But then there's they also own Halliburton, who rebuilds after they blow up a country,
Right.
and all the food stuff. So there's this we're all working for them, and that's really the reason that they want to keep this juice. It's like the fuel in the machine, and they're going to take over the world with it. So if you want to know who owns BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, the highest shareholder of BlackRock is Vanguard and State Street. And if you look at who owns State Street, it's Vanguard and BlackRock. If you look, so you can never figure out who owns these things. They own each other. It's
right.
It's really freaky.
Yes. But it's like it's new modern warfare, where if you study world history, you see how countries get gobbled up, right? Like it's really easy to see, because war looked different during olden times, where you had horses and bows and arrows. But we live in a very different world now, where you can gobble up countries and people without ever shooting an arrow or pulling a trigger. Is that kind of what you're alluding to then?
Yeah, and then the final piece of this puzzle is they also have the money to buy politicians, and they buy the Congress and say, this is what you're going to vote for, and this is how much you're going to spend. This is what you're going to spend, and you're going to spend it back on us. So it's this circular system that's juiced with money, but really it's just a master slave society. Whoever owns BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, we're just hamsters in this world, in this wheel, this machine that's just kind of fueling their takeover of the world, socially, politically, and economically. It's the same stuff from
geopolitics too, like land too. So
right.
that can feel overwhelming for the average person who's just now hearing this, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, well, then we never get out and the future is bleak. There is no future.
Right.
But there is a future, and I refuse to give up hope in a good future for my kids. And that's not because I want to see it through, what are they called, like rose-colored glass? I don't know, but it's because I actually do believe that there is hope. There is hope this side of heaven, and I think that education is key. But what would you say to encourage people who are just coming into this conversation and maybe seeing it for the first time, in how, yes, we are in insane debt. There are controlling influences that are outside of us and beyond us and have kept us in this for a very long time. But is there an escape from this rodent wheel that we're on?
And it's actually a lot simpler. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's a lot simpler than you can imagine, because this all seems overwhelming, like some science fiction crazy thing. We're trapped in the Matrix type of thing. So the first thing is knowledge. We need to educate more people. And I think what I've seen in the last 15 years of people like Britt coming into this discussion is miraculous. When I first started looking into it, there's maybe hundreds of people. And now there's millions of people that know what the Fed is and are talking about it. And that's really encouraging. And if we have the same amount of growth in the next 10 years, then it's going to be big news. And I think that's why they are pushing so hard right now to the finish line. They're grabbing everything. They're ready to do this World Economic Forum, but what's the Great Reset. They're just ready to do this. And they're pushing like they already can have it. That's because people are waking up for real, like a real awakening. Not this Democrat, Republican, American versus Chinese. And we're seeing for what it is. And if we keep down that path, then and continue to get, gain knowledge about other things too, like what the way that the world should be on the other side of this, then we will have minds that can't be fooled, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe the bigger part is that we need to have spirits that can't be ruled. We saw during COVID just people rolling over and just like, well, we need to have people that are like old school Americans, like the revolution. Like, I'm a free person. I own myself.
Yes.
How dare you say, whenever someone says mandate, you're my enemy. That's aggression. That's a criminal act for a politician to declare something upon you. You're a sovereign. This is the only life you have to live. It's precious. You can't allow someone to control you. So we got to change the whole scope of what like politics is, what government is allowed to do. Politicians need to be more afraid of the people. So I think that those two things are the main foundation for what we can do. And I think that's happening rapidly. I think people are getting on board with those two things, knowledge and, a spiritual awakening.
That's good. Do you think that we'll see a time in our lifetime that the Federal Reserve is, in the words of Ron Paul, abolished, that it's gone? Yeah. Or do you think that it's here to stay and it's a cyclical laundering cycle that we're not going to ever get out from under?
Right. Well, logistically, it's a lot simpler than you can imagine. Congress just has to say, we're done with the Fed. This is not working. But we can also prepare for that there are some states that are creating their own currency systems. I think Texas has one. I think Tennessee has one. Preparing for something else to jump to. There's Bitcoin. There's the private, those types of things. These are better monies than what we have. They're not. It's more difficult to enslave people by them.
Has it been pushed to Congress to actually really try to abolish the Fed, or has it always just been like a pipe dream?
Well, the movement's not big enough yet, and Congress definitely does not want to give up their spending power, right? They love shopping with other people. Yeah.
They hold their power too, because if they're bought by the lobby groups that are bought by the outside influencers, then
exactly. If we had 10 million more people that understood and were ready to end this, it would end. Congress would end the Federal Reserve, and I can explain what that looks like.
Explain it.
So this is just another thing that's going to blow your mind. Something that I most recently started thinking about. My wife helped me figure this out. If you stop paying your mortgage, who loses money? The person that built your house got paid. He bought his food in his house. The people that harvested the wood and the materials and the companies, they all got paid. They all paid their mortgage. The people at the bank tellers, they got paid. Everyone got paid and lived according to this system. So if you just stop paying, who's really losing? Same with your car.
Would the argument though be that, because it's the same argument I hear made for if enough of us stop paying our taxes, right? But wouldn't the argument be, well, then you're going to lose your house. They're going to come after you and foreclose your house. Right.
So a lot of people, and I would say I'm in the majority, but this is a little bit more radical. If we ended the Fed and just said, listen, everybody, you own your stuff. Here's the title to all your stuff. Forgive all debt, because that debt no one ever risked anything to give you that debt. It's the Federal Reserve Bank. They had nothing to offer. They put it out in the system. It juiced the system. Sure, we drank the juice. So we're done drinking the juice. We're going to end it. Forgive all debt. Everyone owns what they own, and now we're going to go to an honest monetary system. That could happen with an act of Congress, and that would just
it would actually be simple, because then the only people hurting would be the central bankers and whoever it is that's outside, right? Because it wouldn't be the average. I mean, I can't even really think of any domino effect that would fall on the American people. It would be the outside influence would be the ones that would be hurt. And really then the ultimate is whoever ultimately owns the purse would be the one that's hurt. And that's not any of us. It's the people outside of the machine.
And and like student loans forgiven. Who wouldn't get behind this? Hey, everything's forgiven. We're going to restart. It's a good reset. The greater reset. Except we're going to get rid of these guys. But it would be so simple in my mind. We would just need to be prepared that the system on the other end has to be an honest system, and you're going to have to work. You're not going to be able to play the system anymore where where people leverage debt. And I understand. I try to do it myself. But it's going to go back to the old days where you work, you save money, and banks. There's no set interest rate by the Fed. All the banks have competing interest rates. It's going to be a whole new world, but it's going to be honest. And the people that work the hardest and create the most value are going to make the most money, and the people that don't, like the BlackRock people, they're going to be worthless because they've never worked for 1,000 years. Their families have never done anything valuable except for steal from people, and they're going to have to get real jobs.
It would also change the way that politics works, because you wouldn't have those outside lobbyists that keep those powerful people in power, not because of the consent of the governed, but because of the outside influencers. So it would change, it would shift politics too, I think that's a big connection is why, like when we see the scope of modern American politics and we're like, how did we get here? Like, right. If you really look around, how the heck did we end up with these people in like power? Well, a big answer is because of those outside lobbyists and the machine that I always refer to it as the machine. So connecting this all to our modern day scope of politics, and we don't have to get into like Trump, Kamala, but my question would be, we do have two candidates right now who, 7 days out at the time of this recording, who are, one of them is going to win. What is your thought in terms of how we approach just looking at the options that we have and the reality that there's a machine that installs people and keeps them in power so that we are always slaves and never free? What's our best option in how we should look at the options that we have with all of this in mind?
Well, I think the option that's best out of those two is obvious. What would be better, in my opinion. I think, and it's strange, but not that strange, that they're trying to kill Trump, and they're just like being ridiculous the way that they're calling him Hitler and making these connections. It's just crazy. And so if they hate him that much, then maybe he's good. And also he talks about the deep state, and that's what we're talking about, the bureaucratic state that's there. They're the ones calling the shots. They're the ones corrupting our republic. So I'm cautious of like naively like saying this is going to solve it, and like he's because I don't think that he's as radical as he needs to be to take care of the Fed. Because I heard him talk about the Fed, but I don't heard him talking about ending the Fed so much and how he was going to do that. But that's what needs to happen.
What do you think about Elon with the DOGE and him talking about coming on with the Department of Government Efficiency and being able to immediately cut $2 trillion in spending? I haven't heard him. I did hear him mention the Fed actually when they were at Madison Square Garden. Elon said something about the Fed and how this administration is going to keep the Fed out of our wallets. Obviously, that doesn't go far enough, but the fact that they're talking about it.
Right.
For me, that's encouraging.
And the way and this is why I'm a lot more radical about the subject, is you have to recognize that these people they're not good people. They will kill 1 million people just for whatever. They don't care about us. We are like ants to them. So trying to like deal with them, like we're going to cut our spending and all these things, they're going to, if they have any levers of power, they're going to crush us with it, and we're going to scream for help, and then we're going to say, oh, we'll give them back the power, spend more, whatever. They buy our politicians. I believe that the way to end the Fed is to just end it. And if anyone complains, you do it French Revolution style. Like, these are not good people. Some people are starting to call them demonic, and I think that is the correct term. These are
Yes, I agree.
grown
And I
people.
also agree with your term you used in the beginning too. I would agree with demonic. I'd also agree with the term cartel, that that's literally what we're sitting under. We're paying the cartel and then thinking that we're free Americans. It's like, no, and not only that, but our kids are the ones that are going to be massively affected by this. I mean, we already are, but it's just going to continue to get worse and worse if we don't have that clean cut. Which is why I think it's so important for what you said, that for us to be talking about this and explaining it in ways that people can understand, or even breadcrumbs where people are like, hey, I'm interested. I've never heard this before. How can I find out more? So how can people find out more about all of this that we've been discussing?
Um, well, I think that's the reason Connor and I started the Tuttle Twins, is we wanted to have these ideas that seem complex and kind of simplify them, even put illustrations to them. We kind of pitch it as like, these are kids' books. Kids can understand them and kids do like them. But really, it's for the whole family. It's for the parents, too, to understand these concepts, what the future could be like. We do focus a lot on the Fed because the Fed really is the source of most of the human suffering, the man-made human suffering in the world. If that did not exist, we could have a free country again. We could have our politics would work as it was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we can just educate, I'm like 10 million more people, like in this country, I think that things would change drastically. We don't have to ask permission. We could just start. We could just do it. We can take control of our lives. We can take control of our local governments. We can say no to the Fed,
Mm-hmm.
the federal government. We can just take control of our freedom and our life again.
And it gives us the avenue to unlimited prosperity again, where it's like, it's true prosperity, not this fake artificial prosperity where it's like, great, you're really wealthy, but you're owned, which is really sad. But that's actually the case in America right now. Doesn't matter how wealthy you are because you're still a slave like all the rest of us. Oh, this was such a good conversation, Elijah. And I love that it's kind of like the beginning blocks for people who are just now kind of waking up. And like you said, there is such an awakening on this topic. And I think that the more people who are discussing this, and just at dinner parties and family reunions, bring up the Fed, bring up how we're all slaves and how we need to find a way out and figure out a way out of this, because it's not sustainable. Like having 4.918 trillion interest on our national debt is absolutely insane, and it keeps us all slaves. So if we want to find out a way out of the cartel, we're going to have to start talking about this. The Tuttle Twins is amazing. It's such, I love it. Even before I started partnering with you guys to get the word out about what you're doing, it's because I truly love and value what you have created. I'm a homeschooling family. And so kind of like probably around the time you guys were launching, I was gobbling up everything you guys were putting out. And my kids and I, we just sat down on the couch the other day and read Medals of Merit together. And I was walking them through what communism and Marxism is. And I love that you make it accessible, where some of this stuff like fiat currency and the Federal Reserve can seem so unapproachable. And you're like, no, it is approachable and we need to talk about it. So let's put it into third grade language so everyone can talk and become more educated, and then we can resist it and push back. And that's the only way we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, and it gives me a lot of hope that we are having so much success, and people are reading these books. Which these are big ideas. When you get just a little bit of these ideas in your head, they'll just blossom, take over your whole soul. You really understand freedom, and it really excites you. And the good thing about this $40 trillion in debt, it's all fake. It's not owed to anyone. And you'll never hear a politician say that, because they're like, we need to cut spending. They use it as a political tool. We just need to end it. We could just end it.
Say no.
Just say no. You don't own. You never risked anything to give it to us, and you lived long enough on this. You leeches. Now go get real jobs. We're done. We don't owe you anything. That's it.
It's really good. I love it. It is. It's so simple when you break it down like that. Okay, Elijah, for people who want to know more about Tuttle Twins, if they don't already, how can they find the Tuttle Twins and what you guys are doing?
Well, our best place to buy the Tuttle Twins books is on TuttleTwins.com. We have series for toddlers, teens, kids, history books. But if you just want to follow us on a daily basis, we have social media, Tuttle Twins on Instagram and Facebook, and I think we're trying to get into TikTok. We haven't really been strong in that.
I got banned on TikTok. I tried it and I got banned right away. So maybe. And then one of your books is actually, you have a book on the Federal Reserve, on it's something the Creature of Jekyll Island. It's a small little book. You can read it in 15 minutes.
And that's based off of G. Edward Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's like 500 pages. It's huge. But it's just a breakdown of that, and you'll get a good start. We also talk about central banking in our history book, because that's actually a big part of our history. When the country started, we had a central bank, and it's the same stuff. Same people trying to undo what the revolutionary founders created by using a central bank to take it over. So those are the two best places. Oh, also you have a teen book. Tuttle Twins Guide to True Conspiracies. There's a part in there about the Fed. This is a true conspiracy. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is an actual conspiracy. So lots of products that will help you understand that better.
And don't be ashamed if you're, old like me and you're like, I need help. Go get yourself the little tiny book that's geared at the kids, or the one that's geared toward the tweens, or the history books, because it's important that as adults we read it and we can understand it. So, sometimes I think we want to bite off the big stuff, and then we're so overwhelmed that we shut the book and we never pick it up again. But what I love about Tuttle Twins is you pick it up and you can actually read it and understand it, and you can use the pictures to help you if you need some extra help. So Elijah, thank you for coming on. Thank you for walking us through this and for giving us hope. And I hope that this creates a good conversation for people who may have felt intimidated by just the world and where we're at in terms of our debt and the fake debt. I hope that it gives people some hope in knowing that there is a solution. It is simple, but it's going to take getting educated.
All right. Thanks for asking those big questions. Those are good ones. And hopefully I made some sense and didn't sound too crazy.
You sure did. We'll have you back on again soon.
All right. Thanks, Britt.
Thank you.